Welcome to Forbes Movies. Joining me now is Scott Mendelson, a Forbes entertainment analyst and box office pundit. Scott, thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Of course. So it looks like there's a few good movies coming out this weekend. Can you tell us about them?
The Woman King is excellent. It is a $50 million, 2 hours and change action drama set in, it's a period piece set in a mostly pre-colonized Africa. Um, it stars Viola Davis, excuse me, Lasana Lynch as leaders of an all-female squad of uh, Amazon warriors that were basically tasked with the protection of the king. And in this case, it's a newer king played by John Boyega. Um, in some ways, it's a very conventional narrative. Obviously, the quote unquote gimmick being it's people that aren't used to being given the spotlight for these kind of narratives, but it's very good. It's very well produced. It's handsomely staged. It's very well acted, obviously, considering the cast, and it's just a solid action adventure picture. Um,
And is it based on a true story?
yeah, and I don't know how much of it is true, and frankly, I don't care for two reasons. A, does it work as compelling fiction? Yes. B, am I going to use it to cheat on a school assignment? No. Ergo, I don't care if it's true or not.
And Viola Davis was amazing in it. What do you think Oscar nomination in her future for that role?
I dare not hope. I mean, if it breaks out this weekend, then yes, I think it would end up in the conversation just because it's one of the more by default commercial award season pictures that we're going to get over the next few months. And I'm not counting stuff like Wakanda Forever or Avatar The Way of Water ending up in the race. That's an entirely different conversation. I'm talking about, festival debuts and films that are explicitly aiming for Oscar glory. Some of them are frankly more commercial than others. Um, Steven Spielberg's The Fabelmans is a semi-autobiographical story that debuted in, I believe, Toronto on Saturday night to just rave reviews and buzz. And I mean, here's an easy prediction. Every single Steven Spielberg drama since Amistad, so not Amistad, since Amistad has been nominated for Best Picture.
So do you think the Fablemans will continue the tradition?
Yes, I'd be shocked if it doesn't, unless everybody inexplicably hates it. Again, one audience has seen it, and Universal's got a long road ahead of them. But unless the word of mouth is wildly out of sync with what everybody else thinks coming out of Toronto, then a nomination, I think it's got it in the bag.
And I think it received a 2 minute long standing ovation in Toronto, if I'm not mistaken.
Everything gets a standing ovation in Toronto. They've
Hey, but a standing O is a standing O.
Yeah, I mean they've taken to timing the amount of the standing ovations.
I know.
In fact, I think if you get under 4 minutes, you're taken out and shot, but don't quote me on that. Um,
So I do want to continue talking about, we will get to the Oscar buzz in a little bit, but what else is coming out this weekend?
a Pearl, the Ty West prequel to X, which came out earlier this year. Apparently, he shot like an entire trilogy of movies starring Mia Goth's protagonist. I'm being vague here because I don't want to give if people that haven't seen X. Um, I don't know the name of the new one that just got announced as coming soon, but he basically, A24 got three movies out of this guy, which is a pretty good bargain. X, which I enjoyed, it's the 1970s. It takes place on a porn set in a farmhouse, so it's fun for the whole family. Um, Jokes aside, it's a pretty good movie. It's surprisingly sincere and melancholy. It made about 11 million domestic earlier this year, which, considering those variables, I would say is pretty good.
And so, what's the point of releasing a movie and then releasing the prequel? Why wouldn't he release Pearl first and X second?
Honestly, I don't know. It might just be a matter of X was the one that he wanted to release, the one that he was sort of tasked to make. And somewhere along the line, he's like, we got everybody here. How quickly can I do this? And again, I don't know. These are, if I were interviewing him, these are questions I'd ask. It might just be that X was the more conventionally commercial of the three. It is a, the story that happens now, and everything else is either what happens before or afterwards, if that makes sense. Um, and considering how many franchises tend to tell the wrong story first, I think releasing X first was probably the right play.
And would you recommend people seeing X before Pearl or Pearl before Pearl then X?
I have not seen Pearl yet. I had to triage it this weekend, and now my wife apparently wants to see it, so I'm going to wait until we can catch a matinee sometime next week. That being said, people I have spoken to seem to imply that Pearl, while pretty good on its own, works better in tandem with X. So I would say in this case, do what the filmmaker prescribed. See the one that came out first.
Got it. And what about, I know See How They Run is coming out this weekend. What do you think about that?
That is a fun little film. It's set in the 1950s, I believe. It's an all-star, relatively speaking, Whodunit, starring the likes of Sam Rockwell, Adrian Brody, Saoirse Ronan, who's delightful in the picture. It's a gets type comedic role. Um, let's see, other people whose names are escaping me, forgive me. But there's about a half a dozen, fun players, and basically it's a murder mystery set behind the scenes of a murder mystery. It's about a bunch of people that are putting on an adaptation of an Agatha Christie novel.
Okay.
And murder strikes almost immediately. And Sam Rockwell and Miss Roden have to find out who done it. I think it's more interesting in terms of how it plays around with the genre tropes than it being an emotionally engrossing motion picture. It's very light, it's very slight, but it's a good time at the movies if you're so inclined.
There have been a bunch of whodunits in recent years: Murder on the Orient Express, Knives Out, Only Murders in the Building, and Death on the Nile. So, how do you think See How They Run stacks up to those?
Quality wise, I think it's lesser. I mean, I don't want to say it's the worst of the bunch, but I think with the caveat that I like all of them, I think it's the worst of the bunch. But the record, I have not seen Glass Onion yet. I was not in Toronto. But again, most of the reviews are pretty salutatory. So, I'm thinking worst case scenario, I'll be the guy saying, oh, it's only just good, which, whatever.
But at least you'll enjoy it. And then another movie that I'm interested in seeing coming out this weekend is God's Country. Do you have any information on that one?
I have not seen that one yet. I have friends that have seen it that have said it's very good. That one, I'll be honest, I don't think it's going to make any kind of real impact in the awards race or at the box office. So I'm basically waiting so I can watch it for pleasure. It's a novel concept, I know, but I try to do that sometimes.
And why do you think it won't make an impact?
Because it's a very small scale release. And it doesn't have a ton of buzz. In fact, I'll be honest, I forgot it was coming out this weekend, even as someone that's been told to keep on the lookout for it.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason I remembered it, I haven't seen a preview in the last few times I was at the movies, but I was scrolling through my AMC app and saw it there. But what do you think are going to be the big winners and losers this weekend?
Well, if God is just and we live in an insane world, I'll say that The Woman King talks the box office with anywhere from 15 to $25 million. However, and I've been whining about this since Drew Barrymore's Step Up debuted to rave reviews and zero box office. What people say they want from theatrical product, is often very different from what they actually want. And that's been a thorn in my side for a very long time.
Can you expand on that?
Oh, absolutely. For example, in late 2018, we say we want original, interesting, adult skewing, original or new to you, star-driven movies like Overlord or Widows or A Simple Favor. And yet the box office shows that audiences actually want Halloween, Venom, and The Grinch. And I mean, that doesn't mean the other first three are all good and the other three are all bad. That's neither here nor there. But unfortunately, there has always been a huge differential between what, especially perpetually online that tends to move the discourse, what they say they want, and maybe they're being honest because that is a very small subset of the general movie-going population. But at the end of the day, a lot of people that say they want original, non-franchise, non-nostalgic movies, either they're lying or they don't prioritize those films when they come out in theaters, or they just get caught up in life and it just doesn't, it's if you're somebody that only goes to the movies once every once in a while, your last trip to the movies might have been Top Gun Maverick, or 2 months later maybe you saw Thor, or Jurassic World. I mean, one of the biggest problems facing theatrical movie going right now, and this goes into everything that I tend to whine about online, is that, and this is pre-COVID,
Mhm.
box office was up. Ticket sales were down, but not catastrophically so, even under the last 20 years. But a much smaller portion of movies in release make up a much larger portion of the overall pie spent at the domestic box office. In 2011, the top six movies made approximately 17% of the total domestic box office. In 2018, it was about 25%.
So what does that show us?
It shows us, unfortunately, that if theaters can subsist on just tentpoles to a certain extent, with other studio programmers and again, non-franchise, non-tentpole movies, whatever you want to call them, then that's fine. Because at the end of the day, movie theaters make their money on refreshments and concessions, and a large popcorn purchased for The Lion King is the same amount as one purchased for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, or Dora and the Lost City of Gold, or Are You Afraid of the Dark, or et cetera, et cetera. So, it's, as long as you have these tentpoles that are massive, hugely successful theatrical releases, then basically these tentpoles aren't just keeping the studios afloat, they're keeping the entire theatrical industry afloat. I don't know if that's a system that can, survive like that forever, but the problem we've been seeing for the last 7 or 8 years, I would say 6 or 7 years, is that the audiences that used to go to the movies just to go to a movie, and they would see the non-tentpoles, the non-event films,
Mhm.
as well as the tentpoles and the franchises. It's not like they were like, I'm too good for the Lion King. They would see the Lion King and they'd see other stuff too.
Mhm.
Um, Now a lot of that audience has migrated to streaming. So they see that non-tentpole content either in the comfort of their home, or they don't watch it at all. So it's been very tough going for the last 6 or 7 years for just a movie.
And hypothetically speaking, is there ever a world in which movie theaters cease to exist, do you think?
Not unless distributors accidentally or intentionally kill them by withholding product. I mean,
And we have been seeing less and less product, though.
yes, and again, there's unfortunately there's a lot of concurrent reasons for that. COVID delays, a certain streaming over theaters mentality that I think they're kind of getting out of, but you can't just turn on a switch.
Mhm.
Um, and but as much as we'd like to think that the people that run the industry love movie theaters and they adore the theatrical experience and yada yada yada, if they could have put theaters out to pasture 15 years ago, they would have. But the issue is that you cannot make, in terms of raw revenue, anywhere near what you make from a global theatrical release from a Marvel movie or a Fast and Furious film or a Jurassic picture, or any of what you think of the biggest of the big pictures, without a stereotypical global theatrical release. If Warner Brothers could make $770 million just from putting the Batman on VOD and HBO Max, they
Mhm.
do it, but they can't, so they don't.
Got it. I do want to pivot now to the D23 presentation, which was last weekend. Did any major announcements come out of that expo?
Yes. There were a few original Disney properties. There's an animated film called Wish, and there's another Pixar film called, I believe, Elio. But the bulk of the Disney announcements were nostalgic in nature.
And why is Disney going all in on these prequels, sequels, and remakes?
For a couple reasons, some of which is their fault, some of which is not. Unfortunately, that's what the audience demands. If Tomorrowland had been a box office success, if A Wrinkle in Time had been a box office success, if even remakes like Pete's Dragon and Maleficent, Mistress of Evil, that were a bit less conventional than the shot by shot remakes of The Lion King and Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, if those films had been successful, then I would like to think that Disney would do both. I mean, they're not going to say, "Oh, we're not going to make The Lion King, even though it's pretty successful, because we want to make new IP and new franchises." But I'm sure they try to do both. But when the audience doesn't show up, studios are not charities. They have to go where the audience is. And unfortunately, the audience is speaking with their wallet. They've been speaking with their wallet for the last several years. And when it comes to Disney and when it comes to other studios as well, to a certain extent, they don't want new stuff that they can love. They want stuff that reminds them of stuff that they all previously loved. And in the case of nostalgia bait sequels to on Disney Plus, Hocus Pocus 2 and Disenchanted, they want to be assured that the stuff that they loved when they were kids was good, actually.
This is giving me deja vu from my childhood. Hocus Pocus, Disenchanted, Peter Pan, Lion King, Little Mermaid, Snow White. So, are we getting these remakes and sequels aside from the audience is demanding them? Is it cheaper to make these than original content?
Um, in some cases, it's very expensive to make an IP-ish adaptation. I mean, Pinocchio was not cheap. Dumbo was not cheap. The Lion King. These are expensive, big movies. I'm sorry,
Okay.
but they have a certain rate of return that even when a movie like Dumbo is a box office disappointment, that's still $350 million in theatrical revenue which was a lot more than you're getting from something like A Wrinkle in Time or Tomorrowland.
It sounds like a pretty good disappointment if it's 350 million, yeah.
You lose money, but you don't lose as much money. And the other side of that is that when you make films like Tomorrowland, this isn't Disney right now, Valerian and the Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets, or the John Carter is Disney, Mortal Engines. When you try to make new IP or new to you adaptations, it's probably going to flop. But the value in making them is that you do have a new IP that 20 years from now, today's kids will be nostalgic for, and they'll watch the 6-part streaming sequel. I mean, Willow it wasn't a flop, but it wasn't a success in the summer of 1988. I think it made like 150 on a 40 budget or something like that. But it was not anywhere near the success that it was hoped to be that summer. Hocus Pocus was a flop, plain and simple. And those films have accumulated cult followings over the years for a number of reasons. But now part of what Disney is doing is they're doing two things, both insidious and brilliant. A, they're trying to convince you that those films were actually successful, in the same way that their copious re-releases of their animated films like Pinocchio, Bambi, Fantasia, etc. Some of these were not successes right out of the gate. They're trying to, almost create the impression that they are timeless classics that were huge hits that must be viewed by every American citizen.
I mean, it is working. It's working, but how does that happen? How does a movie like Hocus Pocus, who I'm just now learning that was a flop, how does that get that cult-like following if it was initially not well received?
It's been aired all the time during the Halloween season on ABC/Disney-owned television. And I mean, if you want me to get navel-gazy about it, it was a film that came out in the summer of '93 when the line between a kid's film and adult film was a lot sharper. And even the idea of having a PG-rated Disney horror comedy where people died, where the witches were hot, let's, all due respect. I was 13 when it came out, I can say that. When even the male lead was super horny for his female love interest, and there's a certain horniness that was like Labyrinth, for example. That was another one that was not a huge success that's become a cult favorite. These films felt taboo and forbidden, like very young kids were getting away with something in a time when films of that nature weren't par for the course.
Do you think audiences will get this remake fatigue after seeing all of these movies made again?
Maybe. I would like to think so.
Would you hope so or no? Are you a fan of the remake?
Yeah, I mean, I have nothing against it in theory. I mean, in principle, and there's been plenty of situations where a remake was as good, if not better, than the original. The Child's Play remake was surprisingly good. and it was different enough from the previous Chucky films that it stands side by side with those films and the Don Mancini created sci-fi TV show that's sci-fi channel TV show that's currently running,
Mhm.
which is very interesting and good, by the way. But um, the issue is that what we're seeing is that, and this isn't a new problem, the films that are being remade because they were quote unquote perfect, because they were got it right the first time. So it's like, well, what exactly are you trying to improve upon?
That's
And no, go ahead.
That's kind of like Pinocchio. We were talking earlier. It was too much of the same Pinocchio, the live action versus the cartoon, but that kind of sounds like what you're talking about.
And with a lot of the live action remakes, I would argue what Disney is doing is they are trying to create the definitive version of these stories. So when you think of Sleeping Beauty or Pinocchio or The Little Mermaid or other ones that are in, public domain, I always forget that phrase, public domain, you're still going to think of, okay, if it's the animated version, you think of the Disney version. If
Mhm.
it's live action, you also think of the Disney version. So they
Mhm.
basically have a cultural monopoly on these stories.
So I do want to switch gears now. You were talking about movies that were aiming for Oscar glory. So when you say that, what movies are you talking about this year?
Off the top of my head, Brendan Fraser is very much in the running to win Best
Mhm.
Actor for a Darren Aronofsky's The Whale. That's an A24 melodrama based on a stage play. It's about a heavily obese man that's trying to come to terms with the life that he made for himself when I have not seen the film, when he's theoretically on the cusp of death. I do
Mhm.
not, spoiler, I don't know if he dies or not.
Mhm.
The film has gotten a lot of strong reviews, especially for his performance. There has been some pushbacks on whether or not it plays into certain stereotypes about overweight slash obese people, but I haven't seen it yet, and B, that might not be a place to judge. I do think that there's an ongoing cultural conversation about potentially films made by empathetic people with empathetic intentions that still have to deal with being viewed and consumed and comprehended by less than empathetic people. The example I always give is Silence of the Lambs, which is an incredibly empathetic film that nonetheless has a certain controversy over how the character of Jamie Gum slash Buffalo Bill was interpreted over the last 30 years as a serial killer that was also theoretically transgender. Now, I saw the film when I was 11 years old, and my first thought was, oh, he's a murderer because he's a racist Nazi. He's got a swastika on his bed sheets. That pretty much, but whatever, again, it's when you are of a marginalized group, you cannot always control how pop culture interprets characters that are supposed to represent you. And when they interpret that badly, I have a certain sympathy for that, even if I don't think the art itself was in the wrong.
And Brendan Fraser received a 6 minute standing ovation at the Venice Film Festival. I know you said people are now timing it, but that was huge. He got visibly emotional during that time. And people are calling this his comeback. Can you speak to that?
Yes, he's been out of the limelight for a while. He's been working. I mean, I see him pop up and stuff here and there. He's been on a DC Comics television show called Doom Patrol. He was in a Steven Soderbergh film on HBO Max, a very good one, by the way, No Sudden Move,
Mhm.
from last year, if you're so inclined. I saw him just randomly on some, and it wasn't a Netflix movie. I think it was a Lionsgate premiere, but it's a film noir starring John Travolta and oh God, I should have thought of the cast before I did this podcast. But it's got like 5 or 6 people. I was like, oh, I'm happy to see them.
Oh, good.
And so I watched it, and it's 2-star mediocrity, but whatever. And Brendan Fraser's in that as sort of a quirky town doctor. So yeah, he works. It's the same thing with Winona Ryder. Without getting into the hows and whys of why she's no longer a superstar, she never stopped working.
Mhm.
Um, and but he has not been in the limelight for a while. And without getting into the reasons as to why that is, there is a generation about my age or a little younger, a little older, that's very fond of him because we grew up on Encino Man and George of the Jungle and The Mummy and Blast from the Past. And, in that era also, I mean, he was unusually good at playing that kind of gee whiz swashbuckling hero. I
Mhm.
mean, sometimes you're Orlando Bloom, sometimes you're not. He was Orlando, he was good at that.
Yeah.
You want to see someone who's a great actor but's terrible at that, Jake Gyllenhaal in Prince of Persia. He'd probably absolutely admit that, so I don't feel bad saying that.
And We discussed the Fabelmans. You think that's going for an Oscar for sure. But what do you think about more populist films that were released this year? Elvis, Top Gun Maverick, Avatar 2, the sequel to Black Panther. Do they have a shot as far as Oscars are concerned?
Yes, they all have a shot. I mean, look, I don't want to sit here and say the 4 out of the 10 slots are going to go to Elvis, Top Gun, Wakanda Forever, and The Way of Water. But I think some of those might end up in the mix. Again, none of us have seen Wakanda Forever. None of us have seen The Way of Water. Although both of the, I think it's very likely that Wakanda Forever will be a very emotionally engaging motion picture. And James Cameron has been promising us for a decade that Avatar 2 is going to, I quote, make you shit yourself with your eyes wide open. And let me tell you,
It better.
I'm bringing a diaper. I trust James Cameron. I've already got my tickets for the re-release next week.
Good.
But no, and obviously, it might just be that those films end up in the tech awards. Especially the 3 of them, Top Gun and Wakanda and Avatar. But if those films get rave reviews and if they get strong box office, and you're 2 for 4 so far in that scope, then I think they will be the Oscar conversation. Does that mean they'll all get in? Probably not. I can't imagine 4 of the top 4 of the Best Picture nominees being hardcore, pure commercial pictures, but I didn't expect Top Gun Maverick to outgross Frozen 2 either. So, that film has been making it look stupid for 2.5 months.
Well,
we will continue to talk about Oscar buzz as we get closer. And per usual, Scott Mendelson, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. It's lovely being here.